Gang, what's going on? It's your boy Ghetto. Hope you having a wonderful Shabbat. We back together again for some amazing study. I hope to enlighten, inspire, edify, give you a good word, give you some things to think about today. And as always, feel free to reach out to me and let me know what you think of what I'm doing. I can be reached at all of the traditional places. Let me see if I can pull it up here. There we go. Reach out to me, man. Let me know what you think. I would greatly appreciate it. His ghetto point of view at Gmail. His ghetto point of view at Gmail. His ghetto point of view at gmail.com. All right, so we're gonna continue reading the book of Genesis today. But before we get into that, I wanted to read a book, read some excerpts. I'm not gonna read the whole book. The book is hundreds of pages, but I want to read an excerpt from the book really, really fast. Hold on one moment, family. Let me grab something real quick. I will be right back. Would be kind of hard to do this without a little water. Just wanted to grab a little water. It'd be kind of hard to do this without water. So, I highly recommend people keep their water up. It's real good for you. All right. So before we get into continuing on with Genesis, I'm usually having a lot of amazing conversations. Shout out to all the amazing YouTube channels that allow me to come up and talk and discuss things. And something that came up recently was whether the Native Americans had ever actually been enslaved on any massive scale. And was a lot of the conversations that are had about quote unquote enslavement in the Americas. Um, who and what, who were those slaves actually? Where did those enslaved people actually come from? And was it all just enslavements in a chattel permanent form, or were there also some indentures, some encomiendas, some requimiendos, where people were able to eventually buy themselves out of a temporary time of uh, work, training, labor, uh, servitude. Um, sometimes even it was skilled servitude where people got to learn skills at the end of it. And I know that's a hot button statement because Kamala Harris was really upset when the Florida school board was going to put into their slavery uh, teachings that they were doing for the students in the curriculum that some slaves were in, or some enslaved individuals did actually learn skills during their enslaved times that they were able to turn around and then take and open businesses with. But that's an absolute fact. If you worked at a cotton gin and then you were able to learn cotton gin business, and after you got out of that, because your indenture was over, you turned around and opened up your own cotton gin, you probably make a lot of money. And I mean, tons of the people who were in these contractual situations did learn skills. I mean, they were in skilled professions that made money. And if now you know a skill, if you're allowed to then turn around and use that skill to earn a living for yourself, by proxy, you learn that skill while you were enslaved. So I mean, I'm trying to get why that's such a hard concept to understand anyway. Isn't the point allegedly of when you jail people now to give them skills so their chances of recidivism, repeating their crimes, are less. So I don't even understand how that's a hard concept for her to understand, especially as her being the top lawmaker in California for a while, and as AG, excuse me, heavily responsible for putting a lot of people behind bars, especially with her laws about truancy. And if kids were missing too much time, the parents literally would get arrested at work, on the way to work. Didn't matter, early morning raids at their house and keeping the parents in jail for insane periods of time because of the children's truancy. And also the famed $1 and $2 firefighters that she had. So it's very interesting when people like Kamala say things. But that's all I'll say about that for right now. I'm going to pull up this book. It is the Indian Slavery in Colonial Times with the Present Limits of the United States. Again, Indian Slavery in Colonial Times within the present limits of the United States. So, it might be a good source. It might be a good source. It might be a good source. I'm just saying. See, how's that? It might be a good source of information. Might be a good source of edification. Might be a good source. It might be. I gotta be a little silly with it because people act like, man, the things people say sometimes are so disingenuous, right? So we gonna read, and we on page 68 of Indian Slavery in Colonial Times within the present limits of the United States. We'll start at page 69. The Natchez War was the most important. It's me, Apollo. Come in. The Natchez War was the most important of those between French and Indians in Louisiana. There were, however, minor difficulties from time to time in which the same policy of enslaving captive Indians, was followed by the French. The war with the Fox Indians, 1712, serves as an example of these lesser troubles. By 1720, war had broken out between the French and the Chickasaw, whom the English had stirred up. And these, of course, numbers are showing that there are sources for all these claims the book is making. Intermittent warfare with this tribe and others continued in 1740. And intermittent warfare with this tribe and others continued in 1724, 1728, 1736, with a peace in 1740, but again war in 1750 and 1752. Captives were enslaved by both sides. So the French sitting here enslaving folks. And the English. Some of these were left with Indians to dispose of at will. Others were kept among the French as slaves. So the French took the Indians as slaves. During the period of colonial war, each European nation was in alliance from time to time with various Indian tribes. In the time of the war with other tribes, the allied Indians took an active part. And not infrequently, meaning very often, they were urged on to hostilities by their quote unquote white friends for various reasons. One of the reasons was to obtain war captives to give the whites for slaves. So the quote unquote white folk, but we know what that means. Let's stop the cat. The European people who were here in the Americas would egg on hostilities between the Indian tribes so they could take the people as slaves. And this is in what? This is in the 1700s. So if in 1619 we bringing over all of these people from Africa Why in the 1700s do I need to incentivize war and violence between the native tribes to have slaves? Let me say that again. If this is way past the quote unquote 1619 project, right? So if I am the English or the French and I need slaves, why don't I just go to Africa and get them? Why do I need to have all these wars going on between different native tribes? Why do I need to stir up war amongst the tribes so that the tribes I'm aligned with can bring me slaves? And why do I need to have the tribes fight amongst themselves so I can take the slaves? If I'm so focused on bringing over all these millions of people from across the water, oh, I'm doing all of this simultaneously because I am the great white man. I got you. You see, I didn't think about that. I thought that some of this stuff might actually take time and resources to focus on. But anyway, during the period of colonial history, each European nation was in alliance from time to time with various Indian tribes. In a time of war with other tribes, the allied Indians took an active part, and not infrequently they were urged on to hostilities by their white friends for various reasons. One of the reasons was to obtain war captives and to give the whites for slaves. In 1698, Tonti had encouraged the Illinois, which is a tribe of Indians, who were in alliance with the French. So the Illinois Indians were in alliance with the French to capture and enslave the Iroquois. And so break their power. La Salle favored the same course. In 1708, the Canadian French were exciting the Indians about Caskia were exciting the Indians about Caskia to wage war with each other. So I imagine the Caskia were a different tribe. In 1708, the Canadian French were exciting the Indians about Caskia to wage war with each other and were on the spot to get the slaves to sell to the English. So the Canadian French are selling slaves that they're getting from the Indians waging war on each other to the English. This is in 1708. This is almost 100 years after the alleged 1619 project. Again, we 100 years into bringing slaves from Africa, but I am trying to sell Indians to the English so they can have slaves for their plantations. Something don't smell right here, y'all. Let's keep going. And of course, there are tons of resources that you can look up. Again, Indian slavery in the colonial times within the present limits of the United States. Oh, right. The Marquis de Vaudreuil, Governor General of Canada, in 1706, demanded of the Ottawa of Detroit certain captives as slaves for the Allied Sonatoan to replace their men slain by the Ottawa.
Interesting.
And others to be slaves to the French in return for a missionary and a French deserter they had killed. Let me read that again. The Marquis de Vaudreuil, Governor General of Canada, in 1706, demanded of the Ottawa, who are a tribe. This is also going on in Canada, y'all. The Ottawa, the Acadian, all of these tribes, the Micmac. Gang, if I am fighting tribes in Canada and enslaving tribes in Canada, if I'm fighting tribes in the mainland United States, North America, and enslaving those tribes, if I'm fighting tribes in South America and enslaving those tribes, if I'm fighting tribes in the islands, Jamaica, the Tainos, and enslaving them, how do I also have time to be going back and forth across the seas to Africa to enslave those people And this is again 100 years after the 1619 project. This is 100 years after 1619. And why do I keep bringing up 1619? Stop it. Stop it, y'all. Let's not play. I know they say that's when they started really the influx of Africans here to America. So, did you need something, big boy? You just chilling? You just chilling with daddy? You could just chill with daddy. All right. As late as 1723, family, Dave Vaudreuil was accused of urging on the Abenaki against the Illinois to get slaves for him. 1723, family. The French are still fighting, edging different tribes to fight on his behalf. Come on, don't do that, big brother. Don't do that, big brother. You see, I'm over here trying to record, big brother. Don't snatch up the headphones now.
Sorry.
It's cool. Apparently, such action was as agreeable to the Indians as to the French. An Indian orator of the Arkansas tribe, another tribe, the Arkansas tribe. And then, guys, do you notice that the names of the states is literally just the names of the tribes? The Ottawa was already Ottawa, Canada, named after the Ottawa Indians. Arkansas Indians. Are we seeing this, family? Illinois Indians. Are we seeing this, family? Okay. I just want to make sure we're seeing this. So, an orator of the Arkansas tribe in his address given in honor of Bassal's arrival in 1762 said, "We warriors will strike the common enemy to get prisoners, which shall serve as slaves."
Oh my gosh.
There's no Africans here. This is Indians, family. Sometimes the French went still further and demanded that conquered tribes make war on other tribes in order to get captives for them to take the place of the Frenchmen killed during the war. This is so I got tribes I'm already allied with. Those tribes go to war and get and conquer other tribes for me. Then those conquered tribes now have to go to war with other tribes for me still to replace the Frenchmen I lost in my first conflict. Look at this. Such a condition, Sieur de Livonier placed on the conquered Fox Indians in 1716. As already observed, kidnapping was the means earliest adopted by all European nations for taking Indians as slaves. So they were kidnapping Indians, huh?
What the?
Oh, the Europeans were kidnapping Indians for slaves. Oh, I thought the Europeans was kidnapping. Hold on. In 1524, accordingly, Verrazano attempted to capture an Indian family consisting of an old woman, a young girl, and 6 children on the northeast coast of North America. So we're talking about the northeast woodland natives, the ones that look like that. Oh, okay. But the girl proved so intractable, that means she put the boogies on them. That the soldiers were forced to give up the attempt and take the whole family to the ship and finally carried away but one small boy who was too young to make any resistance. And that is another thing they don't talk about, how many children were actually enslaved in a lot of these conflicts. The purpose of Verrazano's expedition was to obtain for France a place in the discoveries in which the rival powers, Spain, Portugal, and England, were engaged. Some proof that the expedition reached the New World was desirable. A native would furnish it, meaning Verrazano wanted to bring back natives to prove he made it to the New World. In Cartier's first expedition, 1534, he seized some of the natives and carried them on board his ships. In 1534, Cartier is bringing natives on his ship. The relations with the Indians were so friendly that he was able, by gifts and explanations, to persuade them that he meant no harm. 1 second, family. 1 second. So sorry. Yeah, so we back. We back. We back. Listen, gang, I ain't trying to be, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to sit here and hurt y'all feelings or nothing, but we gotta have honest dialogue, honest conversations. So we see since the 1500s, when they say Columbus came over here in 1492 for the House of Aragon and House of Castile, so that's Spain. It's here in the late 1400s. We see Francis here in the 1500s. We see the English pulling up later after that, and they're all taking Indians as slaves. Talk to me about this, family. If you say this is lies, this bring up some stuff to disprove it. Disprove it then, if it's lies. On the second expedition in 1535, we're continuing on, Cartier replying to the request of the chief Tiguragui that the French carry away another chief, Agana, declared that the king of France had forbidden him to bring back either man or woman and permitted him to bring to France only 2 or 3 little boys to learn the language. But these pretended instructions did not prevent Cartier from seizing Tiguragui or Tiguragui and other chiefs for the purpose of carrying them to France. On the outcry of the Indians against such an act, he promised that the chiefs should be well treated, and that after visiting France for the purpose of telling the king about the land of Saguenay, that they should be returned to their own country within the space of 12 months. Come on, stop it. On his setting out for the New World in 1562, the Queen of France commanded Ribaud to bring back some of the natives. And again, there's resources to confirm this. There's resources to confirm this. I mean, what do we want? In obedience to her command, Ribaud or Ribaud attempted to detain 2 of the natives on board ship to carry them to France, but the savages, he's savage now, jeez, managed to escape and swam to shore. Why they gotta be all that though? Because they don't want to be like in your plans. Like, okay, in the book number 3, the narrative of Jean Ribaud's whole and true discovery of Terra Florida, reprimed in Courtney, The Genesis of South Carolina. The Genesis of South Carolina. Terra Florida. So this is him in Florida trying to capture Indians. Come on, guys. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? What are we talking about? I'm gonna read a little more of this and then I'm gonna jump into Genesis, man. But I think I done proved my point. Some of the Indians kidnapped by the explorers, and I will have a time where I'll just start reading some books, and we'll just get into the books. And the books, to be honest, I think 100% coincide with what's going on biblically in the scriptures, and I don't think there's much way to disprove that either. But again, I'm open to the conversations. You know how to reach me, and also here's my IGs. Tap in, tap in. I do got to be better on IG. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna hold you, but I am gonna be better on IG. I am better on IG. I will be better. I will speak it into existence. But my emails, I'm on that all the time. So please hit me up. Send me stories. Send me extra information. Show me why I'm wrong. I would love to have the conversation. Tell me why I'm crazy. I super appreciate the dialogue. You're definitely welcome. If you are a YouTuber as well and would like to get on the channel with me and talk and have a conversation, I'm definitely down for that as well. But yeah, like I'll skip down a little bit and Well, no, let's just start from the top of the page. We had page 73, enslavement by the French in the book Indian Slavery in Colonial Times within the present limits of the United States. Some of the Indians kidnapped by the explorers were mentioned mentioned were slaves only in a modified sense. They were not put to servile labor, yet they were deprived of their liberty and were at the disposal of their captors. So, yeah, I would imagine the chiefs probably weren't put into labor. They were just more used as showpieces. Some were held as objects of curiosity. This is when you get a lot of the Europeans putting people into like zoos and stuff and just having people come see them as attractions. Others were taken for a definite purpose to furnish information regarding their native country and to serve as interpreters in later expeditions. For such a reason, Lahar in 1719 in his journey in the Southwest when returning to the coast, resolved to capture some of the Indians, hoping that by good treatment, he might induce them to allow him to settle in their country and to carry out his plans. Under the pretense of landing to obtain water for his ships, he seized a dozen or more and sailed for Mobile. Jeez, I'm going to assume that's Mobile, Alabama. Jeez. The Indians who became suspicious of the explorers and traders, especially in the sections where more than one of the rival races carried on exploration and trade. Such a state of affairs Dutisnier found in 1719 when he was badly received by the Pawnee, another tribe, whom the Osage, also a tribe, had told that his purpose was to entrap Indians for slaves. And there is that two right there showing that there are sources to corroborate these statements. Man, don't you love sources? The great purpose of the French in the world was trade. The great purpose of the French in the New World was trade. And I would argue that a lot of these French that are doing this trading in the 15, 16, and 1700s are the Huguenots, the Moors, dark-skinned Huguenots, the Wallards, Presbyterians, Calvinists. I would argue these were dark-skinned people capturing and enslaving other dark-skinned people. Oh, Ghetto, you're going way too far now. No, I'm not. I haven't gone far at all yet. I'm only talking about stuff that's historically accurate. And again, you know where to tap in if you feel something I'm saying is crazy. So actually come with some sources though. Like don't just come with your feelings of love. The great purpose of the French in the New World was trade. Their expeditions, excluding those of the missionaries, now I would actually argue including the missionaries, were commercial in nature. With them, gold hunting was not a primary consideration, as was the case with the Spaniards. I love how people talk about Africa had all this gold, but literally the Spaniards came over here for gold. These over here was the cities of gold. Not in Africa. Or here in America was the cities of gold. Have you ever seen that cartoon? Do 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 ah do 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 ah do 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 city of gold. That was here in America. All the gold rushes that happened in the Americas. California gold rush, Florida gold rushes, Georgia gold rushes, Alaska gold rushes. What are we talking about, man? What are we talking about? The Spanish were in Florida. And Texas. Spaniards, for that simple reason. And let's not even talk about the pearls. The pearl hunting that went on over here. Diamonds and pearls. They weren't just offering their love. No, they was coming over here to get the money. You understand? Nor were they seeking a refuge for the persecution like the English. The great fur trade was being developed by them. This is the French we're talking about. This trade was carried on with the Indians, and in all sections were captives in war or kidnapped Indians, and in all sections were captives in war or kidnapped Indians were purchased from the natives. Such purchases was usually a part of the trade in furs. So not only were they trading in furs with the natives, but they were also trading in people. human cargo. The custom of purchasing Indians originated with the early explorers and discoverers. The custom of purchasing Indians originated with the early explorers and discoverers. Sometimes a purchase was made for a purely commercial reason, to obtain a slave to perform some certain labor. At other times, the buyer was moved by a humanitarian motive, to save an Indian from torture or death at the hands of his captors. The purchased Indian might then be allowed to return to his own tribe and be retained as a slave at the will of his new master. In 1678, Duluth, when setting out from Montreal, so again, we in Canada, y'all, on his travels westward, bought an Indian to act as a guide. Dutismier in 1719 similarly acquired some slaves from the chief of the Natchitoches. In 1724, Du Bergmont purchased a considerable number of slaves from the Kansas tribe. Guys, Kansas, Montreal, Canada. The Natichos, I believe this is Texas. We talking about, come on, man. We talk about millions of Indians, man. Eventually, this would add up to hundreds of thousands, if not tens of millions of Indians, guys. Come on, man. Mention is made of 15 at one time, 6 at another. For these, he was forced to pay double price, as the Indians stated that the year before, a Frenchman had given such a price to a party of Illinois who were with them. Sometimes the slaves obtained by these explorers and traders were used on their own expeditions. At other times, they were sent back to the settlements along with other merchandise. Du Bergmont sent some of those whom he purchased back to New Orleans. New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans, guys. New Orleans. La Verendrye, also in 1731, sent slaves back to the French settlements, and in writing of his action implied that he thought he deserved much credit for furnishing the colonists with slaves. So now we talk about slaves being sent to New Orleans, where they set up the Cajuns, the Acadians from Canada, Nova Scotia, Halifax area, now going all the way down New Orleans in Louisiana, becoming the Cajuns. Cajun bois. Cajun, get them poor bois. Eat them poor. Cajun gumbo. And that's how you, man, if we really have an honest conversation about why New Orleans is considered such a magical place, and you have the illustrious history of people like Madame Laveau and all this voodoo and hoodoo history going on down there, and the jazz music. We don't want to tell the truth about nothing. We gonna start cracking these eggs open, man. Again, tell me what I'm doing that's saying it's inaccurate. Until well into the later half of the 18th century, Indian slaves were held by the settlers of Detroit. So now we talk about Michigan too, who obtained them in a trade with friendly Indians, who in turn took them in a war with the Pawnee, Osage, Choctaw, and other western tribes. In 1741, the so-called Nation of the Serpent entirely destroyed 17 villages, killed all the men and older women, made slaves of the young women, and traded them for horses and other merchandise. A report to the home government in 1720 concerning Natchitoches declared that most the extensive commerce which could be carried on with the Indians of that section would be in slaves, horses, skins, etc. Another report sent by LaSalle told of the Alabama Indians bringing 27 to 28 mobile Indian women and children into the colony and disposing of them to the French. The friendly and allied Indians appreciated the results to be obtained from the sale of their captives to the whites, and not only sold them to the coureurs de bois, which were the French traders, to the coureurs de bois, So friendly and allied Indians appreciated the results to be obtained from the sale of their captives to the quote unquote whites. But I guarantee you these courier de bois looked like me, had my reflection, and shared my they were dark skinned folks. They were Sephardim, they were Moors, they were now the Frenchmen who had become the Presbyterians, the Catholics, the Conversos, the Marranos, the Wallards, the Jacobites, the Calvinists, the Presbyterians, and other traveling traders, but took them directly to the French settlement for sale, as is shown in the preceding paragraph. Apparently, all the leading French settlements afforded a ready market for such slaves. Mobile furnishes a case in point. In November 1706, a party of Uasha arrived in the settlement bringing some Abnaki captives for sale. In the same month, also some Choctaw brought the settlement Cahuita and Alta Maha captives for the same purpose. And again, I apologize. I know I am slaughtering some of these native tribes' names. I really do apologize, and I mean no disrespect to any of the native tribes. Salute and blessings to all of the native tribes. May the Great Spirit continue to shine blessings upon you and all of your descendants, and may your ancestors' names be forever honored. Hey. But listen, man, I'm gonna read just a little bit more of this, and then I'm gonna actually have to come back in for the Genesis one because this one is so long already. I don't want to make it too long. It was the Jesuit and French missionaries who first advocated the purchase of Indian captives by the traders in order. It was the Jesuit and French missionaries who first advocated the purchase of Indian captives by the traders in order to prevent their being put to death. By putting them in a mild condition of servitude, they hoped to place them in a position where they could be Christianized. Both Tonti and LaSalle advised such a course of action. The colonists favored the same action for a more commercial reason. The French of Kaskaskia, 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 Kaskaskia. The French of Kaskaskia in 1708 were urging the Allied Indians to war and were on the spot to obtain captives to sell, as slaves to the English. So again, if the English are so busy getting all these slaves from Africa, why do they need to even engage in this purchase of all these native workers? Talk to me, family. Like, come on, we don't gotta be we don't gotta be enemies. We don't gotta be enemies. Talk to me. I'm here to talk to you. This is just a respectful dialogue. This is just respectful dialogue. You know what I mean? So let's continue on. Let us continue on. Let's continue on. Dave Vaudreuil, Governor General of Canada, throughout the first quarter of the 18th century, so we talk about the 1700s, was urging the Abenaki to wage war on the Illinois and obtain slaves for him. An important factor of the French colonial trade was the coureur de bois. These were the French traders. These men, having cut loose from the civilization, wandered at will among the Indians, trading for the various commodities with which they could dispose of in the settlements of either French or English colonies. And the Remnant movie with Leonardo DiCaprio does an excellent job of showcasing the history of the coureur de bois. The only difference is those people, many of them, at least 90% of them, should be copper colored on both sides. The Frenchmen who are coming over, those French people should be dark skinned because those are the Moors who converted after they lost the wars of Grenada to the House of Aragon, the House of Castile. You know, they were getting kicked out of Spain. They had to leave Spain. Many of them went into Northern Africa and became Berberish tribes. That is true of Northern Africa, but many of them also went into Europe. Many places in Europe. They went into Germany. They went into Italy. They went into France. They became the merchants there, setting up trade, bringing their skills in tons and tons of areas to these European countries, to these French countries, to these Italian countries, to these German countries, and setting up periods of economic growth, development, setting up renaissances of arts and trade and commerce. These people, everywhere they went, the bag went with them because they were skilled in labors, they were skilled in artisan, they were skilled in crafts, they were skilled as builders, they were skilled as cobblers, they were skilled as clothes makers, they were skilled as traders, they were skilled as bankers. So everywhere they went, they could set up economies and commerce around the communities which they settled. Period. So other countries welcomed them in because they knew the bag was coming. The bag was coming. And now, if I'm in Italy and I know people in France, if I'm in Italy and I know people in France and Germany, and I still got taps back in with the people in Spain who stayed there and converted and became the marranos and ate the swine. If I have international trade. I got the bag. I got that bag. I'm getting the bag. And you will invite me into your country because I will bring prosperity to it. This is not hard, man. It's not hard to understand. But I know, of course, the Moors weren't the merchants. Of course they weren't. I got it. Let's go. One of these commodities was Indian slaves, obtained for the most part from the tribes who had captured them in war. Judging from the number of these white men of the woods, their unrestrained life, and the evidence given by the men of the time, it seems not unlikely that this feature of colonial trade produced a considerable portion of the Indian slaves used by the French. It seems not unlikely that this feature of colonial trade produced a considerable portion of the Indian slaves used by the French. If the Courrier des Bois did, so the Courrier des Bois were not only French traders, they were slave traders. If the Courrier des Bois did not find a sufficient number of slaves among the tribes they visited, they not infrequently stirred up the tribes to war. So if they went to the tribes and the tribes didn't have slaves, they would stir the tribes to fight one another so they could get slaves. And they did this a lot so that they might obtain captives for sale. On July 25th, 1707, LaSalle wrote from Fort Louis to the minister of the Marines, that the Courrier des Bois from Canada were thus stirring up the Indian tribes against each other in order to obtain slaves to sell in Louisiana. You hear it. You hear this. The work of the Courrier des Bois was, however, by no means limited to Louisiana, but extended all over the area claimed by the French. The desire of the English for the Indian slaves afforded an opportunity for profit that could not be rejected. The desire of the English for Indian slaves, not African slaves. The desire. Why did the English desire so many Indian slaves? And guess what color the English was? Had this beautiful brown chocolate going on too. So you got English that look like this, and French that look like this, and the natives that look like this. And let's not forget that the Russians was here too, doing the Alaskan gold rushes. Nobody likes to talk about Russian America and how they was here in Alaska. Now, I'd argue if you want to start talking about people that looked other than this, that Russian America, that you talk about people from the Russian steppe, you talk about people from the Caucasus, the Ukrainian area, you talk about those people. Now we can maybe talk about people who didn't look like this being over here taking over. And again, HisGhettoPointOfView at gmail.com, or hit the comments or hit the chat. If I'm bugging, tell me why I'm bugging. Tell me how I'm crazy. It's the IG tool. You know what it is. Tap in with me. Let's talk. Let's have a chat. Let's have a conversation. Again, we reading from Indian Slavery and Colonial Times within the present limits of the United States. Couple more pieces, and I think I've proven my point. Like, let's not forget that the French had land all the way up in Canada, going straight down. They sold when the Louisiana Purchase was done by the French to the United States. We talking about the equivalent of about 25 states worth of land, all the way down from Louisiana, all the way up through Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada area. The whole middle of the country, essentially, that millions of acres of land was the property of the French. They had taken over the Acadians, from the Acadians to the Cajuns and everything in between. That was all French territory. And when the French weren't doing stuff on their own land, they were selling the slaves that they were capturing to the English. Come on, man. But listen, I think I'm gonna leave it right there, y'all. The desire for the English for Indian slaves afforded an opportunity for profit that could not be rejected. They always found a ready market for their Indian slaves with the English of the Carolina country. So you mean in their 13 colonies they were setting up, they needed Indian slaves? They always found a ready market for Indian slaves with the English of the Carolina country. And the English in the Carolina country, Moors too, was Sephardim Jews too, was Muslims too, was dark skinned too. What do we call these free people of color? What do they call them? Free people of color? Free people of color? How these free people of color get here? Anyway, the control of the French officials over this wandering class was always slight, and since there was practically no export trade in Indians to be had in Louisiana, and since all the Indians whom they obtained could not be disposed of in the colony, they turned to the English colonies for the purpose. The English. There was always found a ready market for their Indian slaves with the English of Carolina country. If the English have all these African slaves, and they got allegedly all of these African slaves, they got these alleged breeding farms in Maryland and the DMV area of Africans. Why are they so readily asking to buy Indian slaves into the 1700s? Why are they so demanding all these Indian slaves? Guys, we got to stop playing with history. Can we stop playing with history, family? Are we grown folk yet? Are we grown folk yet? Some effort was made by the French officials to prevent this trade, but the attempt met with indifferent success. It was not the traffic in human beings which disturbed them, but the fact that their enemy, the English, was profiting by the transaction. Money, 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 money. Oh, money, 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 money. Money. Damn, enemies, the English was profiting. In 1714, a report of Cadillac. Look at that. Look at all these names that are still prominent today. To the home government lamented both its inability to restrain the French allied Indians from trading with the English in slaves and other commodities, and also his embarrassment at not being able to prevent the French colonists from trading with the English in skins and Indian slaves. Read that again to you. In 1714, a report of Cadillac to the home government lamented both his inability to restrain the French allied Indians from trading with the English in slaves and other commodities, and also his embarrassment at not being able to prevent the French colonists themselves from trading with the English in skins and Indian slaves. Such opposition, however, was not general among the French colonial officials. Some of the most prominent ones were engaged in the same slave trade with the English. even when appearing to be opposed to it. The English needed so much slaves that everybody was selling. Even the people that was front, like, oh yeah, this is bad. We can't be doing this. We French, we French, we French. We got. Of course, this is going to eventually lead to the English being able to take over the country if everybody in from the colonists to the officials are all in on selling slaves that they're getting, starting wars between the natives, trading with the natives, that they're getting all these slaves, they all selling them to the English, and that's leading to economic prosperity among the English now, and they are allowed to now expand their cities out and expand those colonies out, and now have more money for war and for conflict and to gather their resources. I mean, you can see how this would eventually lead to the English taking over and the French just having to do the purchase of the Louisiana territories to them, even though calling it the Louisiana territories is kind of silly when it goes all the way up through the top of the country. But I honestly think they call it the Louisiana Purchase to minimize how much land the French had here, because they don't want us to know what really happened. All right. Such opposition, however, was not general among the French colonial officials. Some of the most prominent ones were engaged in the same slave trade with the English, even when appearing to be opposed to it. In 1708, Bienville ordered the Canadian French to cease exciting the Indians of Kaskaskia to wage war on each other to obtain slaves for them. Yet in the same year, he proposed, since the French would not cultivate the land, to obtain the needful supply of labor by seizing Indians and sending them to the West Indies in exchange for quote unquote Negroes. So now he's trading with the West Indies slaves. So we sending slaves down to the West Indies to trade them for Negroes. And in his report to the home government mentioned above, Cadillac complained of the selling of Indian slaves to the English by Bienville. Such transactions by the French officials were carried on secretly. The Sieur de Saint-Helien, nephew of Bienville, was killed by the English allied Indians while on such an expedition to sell to the English of Carolina. Some opposition to the trade was shown by the Jesuits, since the hoped for results of having numbers of slaves to convert if purchased by the French did not materialize. Man, this is so much information, man. Like, we're going to jump back in this soon. Chaplain desired to send France some girls to have them instructed in the law of God and good manners. Whew. An opportunity to satisfy this desire came with the wish of Montaigne, to present something to the French traveler. 3 girls were given him, whom he named Faith, Hope, and Charity. All these dudes is nasty. They doing messy work. And whom he had instructed in religion, domestic work, etc. Still, other Indians were taken to France by the expedition. One of the Sagamores of the Montagnais gave his son M. de Pont for that purpose. Still another savage, an Iroquois woman, the Frenchman, begged of the tribe which was about to eat her. Damn, so sometimes they would ask the French people, take my kid, take my kid, take my kid, rather that than them be killed and these conflicts going on. Other and similar instances of obtaining Indians are recorded for the same general humanitarian and religious purpose. The Illinois gave Marquis and Joliet an Indian slave boy, whom Joliet took with him going to Quebec, Canada, and who was drowned on the journey. Come on, are you serious? The gave Marquette a young woman, and the Kishkakan chief gave him a little slave, whom he had brought from the Illinois a few months before. This is crazy, y'all. Again, refute it. Refute it. Refute it. This adds up to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, guys. Why do I need Africans? If I'm this fixated, if the French, the Spanish, the English is all this fixated on native Indian trading, how could they also have time, resources, energy, manpower to also put simultaneously in Africa? Talk to me with some common sense and some logic, gang. But we're going to pause this right here. We're going to come back with some readings of Genesis, man. This was amazing. This was Ghetto. I hope you've been enjoying this so far. We'll be right back.